if you have looked at this book very much, you will have discovered that there's really no instruction for piecing in this book. There's a picture, and that's about it. And there's kind of a breakdown of how you could put it together if you were going to do templates. But that's not really how we are going to do the block. Something several of you discovered that if you do the paper piecing the way they're printed, your blocks come out in reverse. Sometimes that wouldn't matter, depending on what you're doing. Sometimes if it's not a letter where you don't want to be a B that's backwards or something like that. But for a lot of things, it really wouldn't matter. Because like this one right here, I discovered when I was working with it, if I'm doing templates, they are printed as if I was going to put all my templates on the front side of my fabric. Does anybody put templates on the front side of your fabric?
Yeah.
Some people do, depending on what you're doing. Some people do, and they put their templates on the front side of their fabric. That's not what I do. So it would not bother me if this block was leaning the opposite direction, if my diamond was leaning the opposite direction. But just for the sake of having it be like the picture for this time, I printed my paper in a mirror image. That's a part of the software for your printer, and you probably have to go to your printer setup. Mine was in Printer Properties under the Advanced tab. If it doesn't matter to you, and like I say, it would not matter to me, I would just print it, let my things lean the other way, and just keep in mind that everything's going to be in a reverse image. The one I'm going to demonstrate is actually turned around so that it's not in reverse.
So is that what was with Granny? Or was it the Granny's
Magnolia that was
Any
backwards?
of them are going to be backwards.
Farmer's Wife.
Farmer's Wife would be backwards, but the only place where you really notice it are those little borders around the outside.
I worked on them 2.5 hours and I couldn't get them, so I brought them so you could help me with them.
Okay, so they are reverse, and mine is reverse up there. So if I were you, since you've already printed your templates, you printed your paper piecing foundations, I would leave them in reverse because it really doesn't matter to the overall look of the block. On this one, if you want to do templates and put your template on the front side of your fabric, you can do that. I'm going to show you how I do templates, and it's not that way. This is the template paper. If you were going to print out your templates, this is what you would print. I actually printed it on freezer paper, and then I pressed it, and I don't know if you can see it. See if I can get it apart so you can see it a little better. I pressed that freezer paper onto cardstock. It's not going to come apart because freezer paper sticks really good to paper. So it made it heavy. I'll pass this around so you can feel it. But I did a template just so you could see. This is not how I do, but if a lot of people do their templates this way, and they cut the way the template shows with the seam allowance added. And I'm going to show you my method, which is different. The first thing I do is just print the freezer paper foundations. Instead of printing templates, I print let me say that again. I print the paper foundations on freezer paper so that I have the shiny side. I've got one here. I don't know if you can tell that, but this is shiny on one side. It's the freezer paper that will iron press to your fabric. So I actually cut it or print it onto freezer paper because I would rather have a template for every piece, and I press it to the back side of the fabric, and I'm going to show you how I did that. So I've pre-prepared parts of it so that I don't have to do all of the sewing for you. This was just a sample to show you that this was a reverse image, so I'm going to get rid of that because I'm not going to use that. I've got my freezer paper foundation. I could go ahead and paper piece this if I wanted. But there are some patterns coming up that are going to lend themselves better to templates than freezer paper. A lot of times the template pieces work better because there's not as many pieces you can get on the paper foundation, and you end up doing a lot of template type work anyway. Now, I also cut off the seam allowances. And I use my rotary cutter because you're going to get a, let's see if I still have one of those templates. Let me have one of those for a second. Okay. A lot of people, when they use templates, they leave the seam allowances on. I cut them off for a couple of reasons. I don't do these engineered corners. I just cut that off, so I'm not messing with that. I've got the points, and I also try to cut right on the line or just a hair on the inside, just leaving room for your thread. I have my ruler upside down on purpose because I've got a ruler that has little textured circles to make it grip better. I like to be able to slide it a little bit better because the paper tends to want to shift on me if I use that. See what it does? It pulls it. But if you turn it upside down, then you don't have to fight it. And I'm just going to put my cutter right on my line up my ruler, and get rid of that sliver. Now, I've got all of the seam allowances gone, and I can line up, and I'm going to cut my pieces apart. Get rid of that. And some of these I've pre-prepared. Okay, so those are my exact size pieces. And remember, it's a reverse image. So if I lay it here, you're going to see that it's reversed. But remember, I'm going to press that to the back side of my fabric. So that's going to be the right orientation. So then I'm going to take my fabric, and my freezer paper is going to get pressed to the back side of the fabric. And I also have notice that the words or any lettering is also a mirror image, which is not a big issue, but that's something that you'll want to be aware of. I've already prepared these two by pressing my foundation paper to them. Now I'm going to cut them out again, and I'm going to this time add the seam allowance. And I'm going to use the edge of my paper, just like when I was doing the I was using the add a quarter when we were paper piecing. And you can use the add a quarter if you want to. It doesn't have the lip like it does when you're foundation piecing, because remember, you're folding back a piece, and that gives you that lip to fold against. This doesn't have that lip, but I can take a small ruler and lay that right on the edge so that you can see it's going to add my seam allowance for me, and you'll be able to see it better on the red one and the blue one. It's not quite as dark, or not quite as light. Okay, so now here's my red one, and see, there's my 1/4 inch. You can see a little black line. I'm just going to slide that where it's right on top of the printed line. Now, if it so happens that I have a piece that my point doesn't come all the way out, that's not a big issue, because my important line is the line right at the edge of the paper. This one, you're going to see that it doesn't come all the way to a point, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And I do this with every piece. Okay, see, that one doesn't come all the way to a point. It's okay, because what I'm really interested in is right where that paper comes to a point. That's where my seam has to come. And then if you look at this, there's a couple of dots there from my selvage. I'm not going to sweat that either, because that part can be actually cut off later. So that's my waist on this. Now, I have my pieces here. It goes like this. The blue goes to the side, on the right side of the rhombus, I guess that would be, and the red will go at the top. I've already got some of them prepared, so you can kind of see how it's going to end up being oriented when I'm finished. Is that making sense? Mm-hmm. All right, so now I'm ready to put together. Let me get these out of the way so they're not confusing us. I'm ready to put these 3 pieces together. So I'm going to layer these together. I automatically have a place to aim for, because I want that point to match up with that point. So I know exactly where. And I don't know if you can see my pen, but see where my pen's coming out right at that paper? I want to straighten those up. Now, remember we talked last time, if I take this pen and do this, that automatically shifts it, and now it's not meeting where I want it to. So I keep that pen just perpendicular to my fabric. And then I get another pen to actually stabilize it. That first pin is just a placement pin, and the second pin is my stabilizer pin. Now I can take this one out. I do the same thing with this. I want the pin to go in here and come out right there. And if you've cut well, they're going to be pretty close without you having to mess with it a whole lot. That's one reason I don't like the seam allowance, because then you've got all of that extra paper. This will, if you get comfortable with this, this will make your paper piecing easier, because this is how you assemble segments of paper piecing. So now I'm ready to stitch. I have the light turned off on purpose because it just creates a glare, the sewing machine light, unless somebody's turned me off. It's over there by you, Laura. Make sure. Nope, it's on. I guess the light has to be on. Okay, away we go.
I was just going to say, make sure you got your needle in the middle.
Yeah, this machine starts with the needle not in the middle, which makes no sense to me.
No.
Let me start it over. It didn't like that. Okay. Now, and I just slide under the, what's keeping me there? Slide under the presser foot and remove my pins as I go. And I'm just stitching right along the paper. If you stitch a stitch into the paper, it's no big deal. It's easy to remove. So there's, and I actually did the other three pieces assembly line style. So I'm just going to use a fabric tag to sew off and on. It does several things for you. Notice there's no hairy strings to have to mess with. Makes your work a lot neater. Now, on this particular block, I pressed toward the blue triangle, away from the red triangle. So you can press however you want. It's actually possible to press open doing it this way. So I've got my piece pressed toward the blue triangle. Now the red triangle goes on top, and see that little ear sticking out up there? Theoretically, if I put those points together, that's where it belongs. Now I am going to use my pin just to check it, but I want to go in here, and I want to come out right at the end of the very tip of that other pattern. I'm going to go just a hair more. And then I'm just holding that pin so it's holding my place, and this one I can slant into that and be able to get it right where I want it. This one's going to go in here and come out right at that corner. And just adjust it a little bit. And it's right where I want it. I'm just going to hold it in place. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, so now I'm ready to go again. And again, I'm just stitching right along the paper. And if I've lined it up correctly, when I turn this over, the seam should also still be right along the edge of the paper. And see, it's pretty good. That's what you want. So I'm going to get rid of my pins. Now I'm going to press away from the red triangle. So this seam's going to go toward my rhombus.
Towards your what?
Rhombus, it's a mathematical term. I only know a few, so it sounds like I'm
It's
really...
the shape.
It's that shape.
Of it. Yeah.
I only know a few, shapes like that, but it impresses people. I don't know why. Okay, so now I'm going to put together this. If you press away from the red triangle and toward the blue triangle, they nest together. And that's another thing that helps. Theoretically, they should line up right together.
Theoretically.
Now,
This looks easy.
This is not going to be, I think you're going to be happy with this. So I want my points to match here. See, right there and right there. And I'm going to put a placement pin there, and then I'm going to stabilize it with a pin. The pins will go right through that paper. I want this point and this point to match up, so if I've got them placed right, I can pretty well just lay them there and almost not pin it and have it right. A lot of times when I put this stabilizer pin in, I'm pinning just into that seam allowance and not going through the paper. And then right here, again, I want this point and this point to match. So I'm going to put my pin right in that point. And we're going to adjust here just a little bit. I kind of like the points there. You know, they were doing those engineered points where they cut off a little notch in both sides. I'm talking about right here.
You got a fuzz and quarter method?
There's a lot of different piecers who use this method. In fact, I think Jenny Beyer was actually the first one that did that, and she had a little tool that you nipped off of all of those little points. I just don't have time for that. So, all right, so now I'm going to stitch together this half. And I start from the center, because if there's any discrepancies, I want it on the outside, not the inside of my block. But if you've pressed carefully and if you've pinned carefully, your seam should go right down the edge of that paper. We're going to sew off. It's down there. Okay. Now, and that's how you want it to come out. Now, at this point, you can choose. You've got a lot of bulk there. You could actually press that open. If you did, it would look kind of like that. I'm just going to press toward the red because I think that it'll lay down better that way. And let your iron do the work. Set the iron on it, leave it alone, and don't be sawing because you're not really ironing, you're pressing. So I've got this half done. I need to make sure when I put this half together that I have it oriented this way. It is possible to sew it this way and come out with a whole different block than's actually in the book. So you want to make sure that you have it aligned properly. Again, I want this point and this point to be matching. I don't know if I'm in the right place. This point and this point. So I'm going to put my pin in right here. And if I've lined it up properly, the pin will come out right at that point on the back. And hold the pin perpendicular, slide that placement or the stabilizer pin in kind of at an angle. This point and this point need to match. I'm going to line that up. This there are a lot of people that pin this way. Charlene Jorgensen, and I don't even know if she's still quilting. Years ago when I first started quilting was doing videos on PBS. And this was how she pinned. And it's still how I pin when I need to really stabilize something. So I'm going to match up this point. It's not cooperating, so I'm going to adjust it a little bit. So I'm coming right to the tip there and right to the tip there. I'm going to slide my pin at an angle. And I'm not even going into the paper here. So now I've got my pin in the three places that are the most important. I'm going to stitch right along the side of the paper. Okay, let's see how we did. And that's what you want it to look like. You want your seams to come right to a point. Now again, I'm going to press toward the red, just because that makes it easier on the next seam. This time, when I put the two pieces together, the red should nestle together. One seam goes right, one seam goes left, so they nest together. But I want this point and this point to match. So I'm going to get my pins out. I'm going to pin right into this point. Come out on the other side, and we're going to have to do a little adjusting, and hold that pin straight and just slide that in kind of at an angle. And then it needs to match here, this point, and this point. We're going to adjust just a little bit here. Hold that pin perpendicular, and we're going to slide this one in at an angle. These points need to match. You should be able to just line those up together and pin it without having to do fiddling with that, because they should line up together anyway. This corner and this point need to match. So we're going to go right here at the corner, go through, matches right at the pin, at the point. I'm going to slide my pin in at an angle. And then when I get this adjusted, now notice there's just a little bit of discrepancy here. I'm not going to worry about that because I can adjust that. I can probably even trim the excess on that. And you're going to sew. Now, if you're sewing and the paper gets pulled off, just realign it the best you can, because it could happen. If it does, more than likely you're not leaving your iron on the freezer paper long enough for it to.
Is that just
We have a question?
Is that just regular store-bought freezer paper?
In the meat department?
Yes.
Okay.
However, you can buy freezer paper in the quilt shop that's already in sheets that'll go through your printer, because I ran that through the printer. You don't have to. You could actually trace it off. What I find, though, is the more you trace, it's kind of like, it loses a little bit in the translation every time you trace it. So I'm better off if I just print. Make sure you're printing on the actual size so you don't end up scaling and then end up with your piece just a little bit too small. But it's regular freezer paper if somebody's just taken a big machine and cut it into pages that'll go through your printer.
Yeah, that's what I did.
I think
cut
it's
mine
a
all up in paper
Hancock
size
and-
and just fed it through.
Okay, now, I didn't match here as well as I like, so I would probably redo that. This one matched better, but that's something you can work on. The reason it probably didn't match is because I probably shifted when I put my second pin in. But at this point, I would split this. It looks like it matches?
Yeah.
Okay. I would split this so I do a little twizzle right there, so that this seam will follow this seam, will follow this seam, will follow this seam around, and it actually lays down better. So you have a little twizzle. The points?
Yeah.
I don't. For a couple of reasons. If you are hand quilting and you're going to do a lot of close quilting, you may want to cut those off because it may create bulk. Your machine quilters, they don't care because their machines are going to go through this. And generally, they're going to go through it just fine. I find, too, that if you cut that off, what that does is just concentrate the bulk in one spot instead of kind of distributing it a little more evenly. So that's why I don't cut those off. I just leave them. I even leave these until I'm ready to put the block together and just leave them there. Okay? So that's how I do templates. Now, when I'm finished, all I have to do is peel out the freezer paper. If I have stitched into the freezer paper, it'll peel right out, but you don't want to be real rambunctious with it. You just carefully peel it out and see there's a little paper here left here. You can get that off and peel that off. So now my freezer paper templates, you could actually theoretically use these again if you wanted to make this block again. I'm probably not going to make it again since I've already made it twice, but it is possible to use that again. So that's the way I do templates. This is the freezer paper that we sell, and we actually had some pages that were like 12 by 18 or some crazy number, and I just kept them because I knew I needed pages like this. And then we ordered some that go through your printer. You do need to know how you orient your paper in your printer. Some printers feed, and whatever's face down is what it's actually printing on as it comes out, and some feed the other way. So you have to know whether you need to lay your paper face down or face up. You want to print on the side that's not sticky. Let me find it. This one's already been used, so it already feels not waxy. Here's a couple of pieces that I've printed but I didn't use because I printed it several times.
Didn't you say one was shiny and
One side's shiny and one's not. The shiny side you won't be able to print on. That's the side that will actually stick to your fabric or would stick to your template cardstock. Now, if you're using this template, say I'm going to make this block 20 times, and I make this template on cardstock. Every time you draw around it, you shave off just a little bit of the edge. So by the 20th time, it's not necessarily the same size as it was on the first time. So that's why template plastic is a good idea. I mean, they make Mylar template plastic. If you have access to X-ray film, it's not a thing anymore because everything's digital, but there are thin sheets of X-ray film. That's what I gave you last week or last time that we paper pieced on. Now, we're done with that part, but I did prepare a couple of pieces if you want to see paper piecing again, since we do have a way to record it and see it better than last time. I do need a couple of things though. Rosie, in there by my sewing machine is the add a quarter ruler